Welcome to the third episode of the Critical Talks podcast. Anything and everything on the future of engineering and industry. And today I'm joined by Keith Fong, who I met a few months ago, actually on LinkedIn. And we've developed a connection and we've exchanged some really cool messages. And I happened to attend one of his seminars or webinars a few weeks back. And as I'm listening to his webinar, listening to him speak, I'm like, man, I gotta get this guy on my podcast. And here we are. So Keith, thank you so much for accepting my invite to have this recorded session with me. How are you doing?
A pleasure. I'm very good. Thank you.
Great. So with Keith's experience and expertise, today's talk is about the evolution of the quality function, and I'll tell you all about Keith's background. He has quite the background, so I'm honored to have him on the podcast today. So to tell you all a little bit about Keith, according to him, helping make the world a better place, more livable, sustainable, and more just is what motivates and animates him. Okay. He believes that the concepts of quality offer powerful leverage to achieve that vision, provided that we understand and use those concepts to their full potential. He dedicates himself to learning and applying quality concepts and then sharing what he knows through teaching and coaching. He's educated as an engineer with degrees in mechanical engineering and metallurgical engineering. And he spent the first part of his career in product design in the petrochemical industry for waste gas flare systems, and then for automotive anti-lock brake valves. And then after that, for about 20 years, he was a continuous improvement coach for a tier one automotive supplier, supporting every function from engineering and manufacturing to human resources and purchasing, for multiple product lines around the world, though his principal work location was in Mexico. He also worked with suppliers and customers throughout the world. He is a Six Sigma Master Black Belt, a Shane and Redux Master, and robust engineering coach. He's a member of the ASQ, and he is also the 2021 chair of the Greater El Paso section. Great. Wow. What a background. So
Thank you.
Just to start off the conversation, I listened in to your presentation on the Wave the Quality Warrior, right? So that was the name of it. And as I'm listening to it, you're talking about this concept that's called the Ladder of Abstraction.
Yes.
And essentially it's a visual that involves a ladder. And at the bottom of the ladder, you have things that are tangible, technical things. When it comes to quality, you could think of, those things as, say, specifications, essentially technical things, requirements, specifications, documents, procedures, and anything that has to do with quality that is tangible. You can define it. And as you go up the ladder, you start to, think or see things that are more abstract. You can't really, define it, like customer satisfaction. I mean, sure, you can define it to a degree, but what, delights a customer and what delights another customer or user could be two very different things, right? So as essentially thinking about that concept, I thought, wow, this is great. I really want to have, this conversation with him. And then he went on to talk about essentially the role of the quality function, and how, what the role has been in the past, what the role, I guess, could be or should be. and I thought we could talk about, the evolution of this role. So another funny thing is, as we're emailing back and forth, he actually made a mention. Hey, I like your podcast. I listened to, I think, the first or the second episode, and he essentially suggested that I also, post these episodes on Spotify, or, like in an audio format, so people, on the go could listen to it. And I'm like, wow, this is a great idea. And it also kind of speaks to quality itself. I was so focused on, posting these episodes in a video format, technology, right? All about technology. I kind of lost sight of, the bare bones, right? Essentially meeting basic needs. Podcast to me and to most folks is in an audio format. I was so focused on, you know, getting it out there in a video format, which is great. Right now we're recording this in a video format, but I'm happy to say that it is now available in an audio format on Spotify. But anyway, that reminded me of the importance of, the basics of quality without going too fancy, and without getting too fancy with all these technologies, um, you know called quality 4.0 or an industry 4.0, focusing on, or never losing sight of the basics. So what do you think of that, Keith? I think you had a lot of those elements in your original presentation.
Sure. So let's start off with the ladder of abstraction and what that represents, because I think it's one of those things that captivated you in the presentation, because I think it's one of those things that's not very clear it's not clearly explained at any point in most people's quality practice, right? So if you think about quality engineers, quality analysts, quality managers, even, right? It's like, so you know the American Society for Quality started out as the American Society for Quality Control, which is inspection, right? So we're at that point in time. It's like, does this thing have the right dimensions, the right material? All of these technical characteristics, but
Yep.
that doesn't address the end customer who isn't actually interested in those technical features. They're interested in functions and performance and other
Consistency,
satisfying
right?
features,
Yeah.
right? So for them, we move up that ladder of abstraction to get to things like, well, how do they respond to it more emotionally? Those are measurable, right? There are ways of doing that.
Hmm.
But for us to deliver these things, right? Whether it's, whether we're talking about service like healthcare, right? If you're talking about going into an emergency room and being treated, appropriately and promptly, or if we're talking about selling a product like a smartphone or something, it's these things have to be brought down to something that we as quality professionals can manage and measure and move. But that's at one level. At the same time, for us as quality professionals, we need to be able to work in the realm of customer satisfaction, right? And it's voice of the customer. So you're basically climbing up and down this ladder all of the time. And it's really important for us as quality professionals to understand, oh, the part that I'm looking at right now, I need to be looking at maybe the bottom, the very concrete, the tangible items, and not right now talking about the customer satisfaction. But I have to understand that these things are linked. We understand there's a linkage there. And if we don't address that linkage, we might disconnect from the customer satisfaction just because we get so focused on the technical detail, right? And then it's just technical detail, and you ship products that, yeah, it met the specification, but your customer's not happy, right? And I've been in situations where that's happened. Well, this is what you ordered, this is what you got, and it's like, but it's not what we need.
But I'm
And
not satisfied, right? So a lot of
oh yeah, that's
yeah.
outrage is a frequent
And sometimes,
consequence, you
yeah,
know so
sometimes
yeah, the
too.
ladder of abstraction is a key, I think, is a key idea. And unfortunately it's not well known. It was introduced like in the 1940s by S.I. Hayakawa,
Mhm.
who ultimately became a US senator, but at the time he was a English professor, I think. So
Great. I'd actually never come across, this concept. And for us quality professionals or engineering professionals, we're really pretty much at the bottom all the time, or most of the time, because we like tangible things that are measurable, that are defined, right? But I think it is crucial for quality professionals, for quality practitioners to understand the difference, right? And see how be and being able to switch back and forth between the bottom and the top, and
Sure.
see how they are related. Sometimes
Yeah, well,
they're,
that they're connected, right? It's a
yeah,
ladder.
yeah,
They are connected, and you have to understand where are you on the ladder with when you're dealing with different things, right? So when we're talking about the making part of it or the serving part of it, yes, that's going to be very uh technical, measurable, tangible generally, versus going with the other limit, which is how are people responding to this. So that's the thing that we need to understand that, and that's got to be present in our mind. I mean, it's kind of like being able to deal with nuance. So that to me is really, really important. And I have sadly seen situations where I'm thinking a very specific situation where the quality analyst was collecting data, and she was putting it into the tables, calculating it out. And so it was just gathering data, but without any sense for what it meant to the customer. And then it turned out the process was out of control. It was in spec, but it was out of control. And that they just never reacted to it because it was all just like, well, this is what I do. I collect data, I put it through this, and then I have a nice little graph that comes out of it, and that's the end, right? That's not
not
what we
really
are
what
as.
the yeah it's not really what the essence of the quality profession is or should be.
Yeah, unfortunately, it's a not uncommon practice, right? I wish it were incredibly rare, but you find still many situations where it's you find it like, wow, you're doing this, you're going through motions because somebody told you to do it this way, but you don't understand the larger goal that you're serving, right? Which is further up the ladder.
Yeah,
Like, is this going to make your customer happy? Do you understand how it serves their needs? So,
I
yeah. So
think.
the ladder of abstraction, I find a very appealing metaphor, and um, I think it's very useful for us. But again, say, hey, this is these parts are together. They're just at different levels, and if you understand that, you can leverage that in your practice, right? As especially if you're bringing on people who don't know much about quality, it's like,
Mhm.
hey, the specific hardcore concrete stuff is the base of the ladder. But as you go up the ladder, then you start getting into the emotional response that you find nowadays in people's expectation of high quality, right? It's like,
Mhm.
is the experience fulfilling to them?
Great. Hold that thought. So, I think what you just said about the ladder itself, and the expectations of high quality, what high quality is, right? I know we have this quality revolution. Actually, it's more of an evolution, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's quality 4.0, industry 4.0, these fancy words, right? And a lot of it has to do with technology, right? What I see is, by being industry 4.0 or quality 4.0, a lot of times we only focus on the technology side of things, so
Mm-hmm.
the bottom of the ladder, which is
Oh yeah.
great. We have a lot more data available, we have a lot more computing power, storage power, we can do things real time, right? But if we lose sight of the top of the ladder, right, as an industry, or as quality practitioners, that is probably not beneficial for the industry as a whole. So in your role, I know you mentioned that you were in a continuous improvement and coach
Mm-hmm.
position for 20 years. So you probably interacted with a lot of different teams internationally, across sites, across even industries. So over those 20 years, did you see the role of the quality function change in any way? I mean, 20 years is a pretty, significant, time going from 2000 to 2020. A lot of things have changed. In your opinion, the role or the mindset of the quality function in general, as a whole, has it changed in any way?
Well, I think on not as much as one would hope, right? Not as much as one would hope, because I think if you look at the last 20 years, you see a lot more talk about lean manufacturing, right? I think that kind of is the dominant idea. You see a lot of, the quality management systems, ISO 9000 among them, right? Where there's all this emphasis on building a quality management system. Um, and that's actually one of the challenges I think we face in quality is it's just not evolving the way that one would hope,
Bam.
right? And the reasons come back. I just feel like so much of our quality is stuck in like 1934, 1924, or whatever. Walter Shewart came up, and
Yep.
you look at the big names, and they're all dead for 20 years or more, right? We're talking about Joseph Duran or Philip Crosby or W. Edwards Deming. You start looking at this, and it's like these guys have been dead, since the last century. Yet what they were talking about is what we continue to say is what we have to do.
Yeah.
It's not.
But we haven't done it, right?
Well, and we're not able to do it for
Yeah.
various reasons, right? And part of it is because I think in a lot of ways they misunderstood some of the roles that we have. And I make this argument in in the way of the Quality Warrior presentation I gave. And like what, if you look at the different functions in a company, you look at what does sales department do? Everybody, I think, would agree. Oh, they try to sell your product or they sell your service, right? If you ask, well, what does housekeeping do? Oh, well, housekeeping cleans, the building or the rooms or whatever. What does security department do? Well, they protect the building or check the people. I mean, you start going through basically every function. What does finance do? What does purchasing do? Whatever. Just from knowing the name, you know what they do. And then you come to quality. What does quality do? And there literally is no answer that a layman off the street could give you.
Yep.
Because they don't know. Well, and the argument can be made that you can have an extremely successful organization without a quality department, right? I mean, there's certainly numbers of small businesses that don't have a quality department that have been successful, right? And you generally look at a large corporation, and they tend to have a quality department. And when you start looking at what they do, it's basically paperwork central, right?
Mm-hmm.
We talk. What's a big function that the quality department does often? It's prepare for audits,
Yep.
right? And how do you prepare for audits? You make sure you have plenty of documentation.
Or making sure that you're compliant, right? So
that you have documentation that shows you're compliant with what you said you were going to do. And that's a worthwhile thing. But step back and say, well, wait a second, we're showing we're compliant. And generally an audit happens once a year, well, it depends on your organization, right? And how many customers you have.
Yeah.
So you might have like, I don't know, if you're doing aircraft maintenance and you have 20 different airlines, each of those airlines is going to come in and do their own audit, right? So you're going to have bunches of audits. It's the same in automotive. You have a bunch of different automotive OEM customers. Each of them is going to want to do their own audit. So yeah, you're going to have bunches of audits, but they're really after the fact things, right? And my argument for quality is quality as an organization's responsibility is to identify the true state of the organization. That is its function. And the paperwork stuff should be supporting that. But at the end of the day, the quality organization, in many ways, to me, should be like the right hand of whoever leads the organization, because you would want to have reliable, timely, meaningful awareness, of what's going on in your company and who should be doing that. Like, is there a designated team for that? I would argue, yes, there is. That team is quality, but nobody seems to realize that that is, in fact, the key function. It's like, oh yeah, mostly it's like, fill out these paperwork for our customer because, we need that for, some contractual requirement, or, and a lot of the auditing, right, is because in order to be in, like, I think you work in medical products, automotive is very similar. Highly regulated industries,
Very.
need to demonstrate that they have quality systems that are being complied with.
Yep.
But that's a condition of business, but it's just viewed as, well, it's necessary. God, we wish you didn't have to do it, right? I mean, that's a very common attitude about the quality. But
It is.
step back and say, what can quality do? What should it be doing? And again, my argument comes back to, if you look at it, there's nobody who is out there, owning the role of, are we understanding the voice of the customer clearly, right? Like, because that's an expertise issue, right? It's not just you're friends with the customer and you talk to them all the time, but like, what kind of questions are you asking? Are you understanding, what their needs are and what the environmental conditions are for their business? And then you start looking at, when we come up with designs, or, for services or products, are we actually fully addressing those concerns? Do we have, um, do we have the right metrics in place? Are there unstated expectations? Speaking as an engineer, I know that we tend to just leap into things. Oh, give me a problem, and then I'm going to throw out an answer without maybe necessarily thinking about what are the options, right? And I see this all the time as a coach. I force the teams I coach to come up with multiple ideas, because otherwise they're just going to, chase the first thing that catches their fancy, and they'll pursue that until they run into a wall, and it's like, oh, this didn't work. Then they have to backtrack and start over again. It's like, well, why don't you just do that all up front? Risk assessment, the failure mode and effects analysis, to me, is an incredible tool, but most of the time, I think it is done under duress. I don't think, the teams look at it and say, hey, wait a second, if I do this, I could probably save myself a bunch of time. But the FMEA, if you think about it from the quality team perspective, it's like, hey, we need to know, what is the state of this product or process
Yeah.
while we're developing it? What don't we know? What do we need to know? Are we taking the right steps to learn? So, again, I argue that even ASQ has difficulty expressing what the role of quality is. There's a lot of talk about, Six Sigma
And tools, right?
and
And
tools,
methods
lots
and
of
all
tool
that.
talk,
Yeah.
but like, what's the unifying idea, the unifying paradigm? And I've got to say, too much of like what I did in continuous improvement, too much of it's firefighting and too much of it's reactive.
Mhm.
And, if you're fixing after it's in the hands of the customer, the costs are so high. It's not just in customer dissatisfaction, but it's also in, like, cost of correction.
Mhm.
I'm sure, if you're in automotive any amount of time, you get to deal with recall. And it's just, sometimes it's just, you feel pained when you look at it and say, oh, we missed this and we shouldn't have missed this.
Oh,
And,
the same thing. Actually, I was in automotive for about 5 years, but the same thing goes for recalls and med device. It's just a
Mhm,
disaster. It can
mhm.
completely, make a company go bankrupt.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
It's, so what I see is, a lot of times, in order to avoid these, or, prevent these things from happening, what we do is just more inspections, more compliance, focused activities, right? And that only delays those bad things. it
Well, that's
doesn't
brute
prevent them from
force,
happening, right?
right? I mean, you're talking about brute force, right?
It is.
We're going to inspect our way in there, right?
Yep.
And in some ways, I think that audits is just another, an audit is just another form of inspection, right? It's
Mhm.
just, it's being done on a different thing, but it's no different. You're inspecting an organization versus inspecting a component, or an end of line test or something, or you're in a service environment where you're doing an observation, right? Those are all forms of inspection, and that so I want to kind of talk about the quality 4.0. And to get to that, I would say, if you look at the evolution of quality, right? I mean, I don't existing as a separate thing is into the 20th century, but before that, what would people think of something as good? Well, handcrafted by an expert, right? A master
Yeah.
crafts person, right? And so that it's been made, and maybe it's a lot of one-to-one type stuff, and then as you got into mass production, yeah, trying to have the consistency and interchangeable parts, but really when you start looking at like what Walter Shewart did with control charts, and you say, oh, now we're taking data and analyzing and then starting to predict, right? The ability to predict, and that to me is like the first step in being a quality professional is, hey, we take our data and we by analyzing this data, now we can understand more deeply how our organization is working, whether it's a single process line or whether it's the overall thing, right? So you start looking at that, and that's just the statistics part of it. But then you get Duran when he promotes the Pareto Principle, right? I mean, to me, you are not a capable quality professional if you do not understand, live, breathe, proselytize the Pareto Principle.
And yeah, and how it works. Yeah. But
You,
it's
yeah,
it but it's a all these things that you mentioned, whether it's SBC or the Pareto principle. So these are technical things, but they should be applied in a practical fashion. But I've seen
mhm,
a lot of these tools or techniques kind of bastardized.
mhm.
Too much detail on the technicalities, right? On the stats side of things. So these methods and tools should be, aids in whatever it is that you're trying to achieve, and
Well,
not it's not the end goal.
well, I agree.
Right?
I agree, but I'll step back. I won't agree that Pareto is a technical tool. I mean, to me, Pareto is a philosophical tool,
Mm-hmm.
right? I mean, yes, you can apply it technically, but
Mm-hmm.
philosophically, the understanding is that there's a few things that are really important
Yep.
in terms of what creates good or what creates bad. One thing that just drives me crazy is when you hear an ad and the company is advertising, oh, we use only the finest ingredients. Like, to me as a quality professional, then I think you're wasting money, because not every ingredient is equally
Needs to be,
important,
yeah.
right?
Yep.
It's like, yeah, maybe you can use, you can get away with, I don't know, you're making a cake, you can get away with a cheap flour, or maybe you can't get away with a cheap flour, but you can get away with a cheap sugar, right? And the people, can't distinguish. To me, it's like there's a point when you're delivering what the customer expects, and going beyond that, and spending, it's like, well, they can't detect a difference anymore. You are not helping your customer, your company, your employer's sustainability, right? Because profit is sustainability. But you need to satisfy the customer's expectations. You want to drive that to make them fully satisfied, but at the same time, you don't have to do it at extra cost. I mean, and
Yep.
that's one of the functions that quality should be driving is, hey, these things are important. These other things are not important. And again, speaking as a guy who's a product design engineer, you know, product design engineers fall in love with their designs, and they don't have the perspective to criticize their designs as rigorously as they should in almost every case, right? So who's going to tell them the truth? They're going to lie to themselves. They're going to be dismissive of criticisms. But again, that's what the quality team brings in here. But you know The other thing that the quality team should be doing, right, is data visualization, right? So when you think about,
Abs-
yeah, all this technical
Absolutely.
stuff, data visualization is probably the key skill, because if you have all this data, it doesn't mean anything unless people can look at it,
And
process it,
understand and
and
process it.
understand its
Yes.
significance,
Yes.
right? So the Pareto principle tells us, as living the Pareto principle, we're not going to show everything. We're going to show what's important so that the people we are serving can make considered decisions. We may not agree with the decision, but if the decision is because, oh, we gave them crappy data and they couldn't figure it out, so they just punted, well, shame on us, right?
Yeah, because we couldn't present it in a way that was understandable,
Mhm.
that, that didn't put a cognitive load on them.
Oh,
I'm,
sure.
I've been presented, charts so many times, charts that looked like, you know, had 10 different colors, and I'm like, what should I be focusing on here? What's
Sure.
the meat? What's the point?
Oh,
Right?
there's no explanation of what
There's no
this means.
explanation, there's no
Like,
conclusion, right?
yes,
Should I
yes,
be brainstorming with you, or should I, is this something that will help me make a decision, or is just something that is being thrown at me for the
yeah,
sake of
yeah.
data,
Well,
right?
and sometimes that's because the teams don't really understand, or there's just a lack of courage, right, to say, oh, these results tell us bad things, and I don't want to be the one to say, we're in trouble, right? And that speaks to company culture. I
Mhm.
mean, where you say, hey, what, if something isn't turning out okay, what do we do? If things aren't as we expected or hoped, can we raise the flag, and that will be addressed correctly, or will we be, lashed out at? I mean, kill the messenger is definitely a concern. And I understand that. I mean, I wish it wasn't, but again, there's at some level where somebody has, in those environments, somebody has to start pushing back. And I would hope that it's a quality professional, right? Because they can link the customer's desires and wants to the imperatives of the business, right? I think if you're in the quality organization, you actually have a real opportunity to see a wider span. I mean, especially when you're in problem solving, you get to see it all, right? I mean, I have worked, you know, literally name a function. I probably did a project or multiple projects with them, not just, manufacturing or engineering. So
Yeah.
I mean, it's just like, yeah, you can see a lot of these issues. Everybody has them, right? If there are no problems, you wouldn't need the employee. But uh, to be able to say, oh, wait a second, there's kind of a sameness in every team in terms of trying to address their problem. And if we can standardize that, and then we can say, how do we pull out this data, and how do we put it forth in a way that is meaningful, and actionable, then that's what we do as quality professionals. And again, that gets back to the quality professionals being the ones who drive an understanding what is a true state of our organization at this moment. If you're working on a production line and you're the quality analyst or engineer on that line, your scope is that line, that manufacturing line. Or if you're in a hospital setting, say, maybe it's a specific department, but and you're going to be reporting out at that level, and then somebody who's the director of quality should be looking across, hey, the whole organization. But whatever our scope is, we ought to be the ones where they turn to and say, what's our state? Are we doing okay? Is it trending? How is the trend going? Those are things that we should be doing. That's my, again, I don't see that universally. And sometimes I don't even see it commonly. So I would,
Yeah,
that's the distressing part.
that's a problem. Okay, so just to recap. So, your definition of, the role of the quality department is pretty much, you know, identify the true state of the business, right? And that's great. I love it. I think we should introduce this as a new term. But what about, in addition to identifying the true state, what about improving it? Should that be, should that be confined to the quality department or function, or should that be everyone's responsibility?
Well, I think there, if you look at what makes quality,
Mm.
I think it's actually out of the hands of the quality department. Like if you're designing a product, the quality department is not specifying dimensions or materials, right?
Mhm.
They're not specifying suppliers. You know, it's not their role. So now, what can the quality department do? And somebody the practitioner in the quality department, what can they do? Well, they can help drive the right questions, look for the right data that you need to
Yeah.
gather. All right, those are things that are fit the role. But in terms of if you say, hey, what makes something good? Well, it comes down to things that are in the hand, like talking about products. It comes down to the people who are actually designing and specifying the features of the product, which isn't in the quality department. But the quality department can come back and say, to evaluate this, the customer has these expectations. You should be performing these kinds of validation tests.
So it's more of what I'm hearing is, instead of like actually driving these improvements, it's more of a role of a facilitator,
Oh, totally. Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because the quality department's never going to own the design responsibility,
Hmm.
right? If you're in an organization that's big enough to have its own quality departments, it doesn't own that. And if you're in a manufacturing plant, there's a quality department, but it's not the production department, right? It supports the production department. I think there's good reasons for that,
Yeah.
but you also have to uh, you have to be mindful that, the production department needs help, right? They need to understand their true state.
Yeah.
And if the quality department doesn't really recognize that, then things are not going to be okay. And I'm thinking of a specific plant where they would collect data with the idea that they're going to analyze it at the end of the month. They're like, but what if something goes wrong, on day two after you started collecting, the second day after your last analysis, right? You have to have an incredibly stable process, an incredibly capable process. And then, but if something goes wrong and you don't react to it promptly, you're creating enormous issues. And it did, right? Multiple times. But they just didn't see themselves as like, hey, I'm here to help the production department by letting them know how they're doing, right? Production department only cares how many of them, got the green light at the end of the line test. And is it enough of them? Is there enough of those green lights that they can fill up the boxes that they need to ship the next day? They can get caught in that trap. And again, I see quality as kind of the one that helps them do better and helps keep them kind of honest. Well, keeps them honest.
Yep.
That's a really important role. And, if you look at it, again, we started talking about like the evolution of quality. You get into these tools to start to understand the state, but the bigger step is, how do we turn that into something meaningful so it's actionable? And, with the Silicon Age, right, we're talking about how, now we do, we can do real-time analysis for the last 40 years, right? If
Mhm.
on a production line at least. And then now we're getting to this case where we are collecting data is basically cheap,
Yeah.
a lot of it. But again, going back to the Pareto Principle as a philosophy, it's like we know most of that data isn't really meaningful,
Isn't
or at
helping.
least
Yeah.
it may not help, or it may not help for certain issues, right? So it kind of depends on what we need to
Yeah.
focus on. But who's going to help dig into that data? Who's going to have the skills, or who should have the skills to like say, hey, this is what the customer is wanting, not just what is on the specification, but maybe knowing a little deeper. And then also understanding the business imperatives and trying to say, okay, what's the right balance here? Do we need to have, it is getting cheap to do, big data analysis, but it still costs money. It still requires somebody to do the work. And like, okay, where are you going to get the most benefit from this? So that again, it guides you in managing your business, right? To
Yeah.
be profitable and satisfy your customers and minimize harm to society. These really key concepts. And so as I look at it, there's the quality 4.0, when you look at all of this stuff, now quality 4.0, I think, you raise the concern that it's tool focused. And I would tend to agree, right? It's like, oh yeah, Internet of Things and big data
AI, right?
and this
AI.
software package and
Yeah.
those are all well and good, but yeah, and you can even create graphs, but are the graphs meaningful?
Meaningful. Yep.
That's the key. Do they mean something, or are they just,
Cookie cutter charts from, from a template.
well, even to the point of they blind you to what's important, right? You just get buried under it's easy to generate graphs, but generating meaningful graphs takes, some effort. And, it might take, iterations to figure out what's the best way to present this information, in a way that's meaningful, in a way that's going to drive the appropriate actions. Or, when you get somebody who dumps a huge table on you and you look at it and say, well, what am I supposed to do with this?
Yeah. Where's the meat of it, right?
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah. I
looking
mean,
for the bottom line. What's the
yeah.
bottom line here?
Well, yeah, where there is no bottom line because the person doesn't act. And,
Yep.
again, that can, if you think, well, as an engineer and somebody who's interested in engineering education, I have the belief that engineering colleges teach engineering students how to solve math problems.
Mhm.
They don't teach them to solve engineering problems. Every dean of engineering I've ever met says the same thing. Oh, to get the most out of this, you need to get a co-op job. Okay, you need to get work experience. What does that tell you? It tells you that they
The
already
education.
know that it's not delivering the educational needs of their students, but they say, students, you're going to need to address this, and if you don't address it by getting engineering jobs while you're in school, you're going to learn it on the job afterwards. So what does that say? It says you're not teaching engineering, and it's kind of like medical schools don't teach medicine, right? They teach anatomy. And, then I know a number of doctors and they basically say, yeah, we kind of have to figure it out after we get out, right? I mean, there's some level that you learn, but they've got a terrible education system as well. It's not, it's, well, just look at results, right? I mean, it's expensive and very few get put through, and, there's a lot of terrible doctors out there. So you have to say, hey, is this a great process? Is this a great system? No,
Not necessarily. Yeah.
well, and you just say, oh, well, at least in the United States, we have incredibly costly healthcare, and there's reasons for it. I mean, which comes back to actually saying that comes back to something that's really important to us in Quality 4.0, which is system thinking, right? This is really the next step. We talked about the ladder of abstraction, but when we talked about concrete things, one of those things that's a little up on the ladder is the system. And, I would argue within the quality 4.0, system thinking is perhaps the most important element, right? Because as we're in a fantastically complex society, right? Fantastically complex. And I mean, there's all kinds of people who want to solve the complex problems we have with simple things, but that doesn't, it won't work. They'll, shake their fists at the sky, but at the end of the day, when you have a complex society, you're going to need ways to work on the system. And so even having a consciousness that, oh yeah, we are working in a system, and that these things are all playing together.
Interrelated, right?
Yes.
They're all
yes.
related.
They're all related. So the quality 4.0 kind of, yeah, you can gather a lot of data and stuff, but there's that mindset, that philosophy, that model of systems. How do they work, and how do you get a system that with the feedback loops produces a virtuous cycle rather than a disaster cycle or catastrophic cycle? So that's what we're looking at.
No, this is all great stuff. And as much of a rewarding career, the quality profession offers, today's quality practitioners should look into acquiring these skills and this mindset that you mentioned, right?
Mhm.
So on top of, what you just mentioned, right? What advice do you have for, quality practitioners trying to navigate, today's ever-changing landscape?
Well, I think that goes back to, what are the fundamentals, right? Because there's some things that aren't going to change. And again, if you step back and say, hey, the role of a quality professional is to reveal the true state of my organization. So I think if you step back and say, okay, well, what can I do?
And
to
how can I do
accomplish
it?
that.
Right?
And how can I do it? Right. So there's things where I think every quality professional really has to think about, okay, am I skilled at the tools of the job? Right. And then particularly data analysis. I mean, literally everybody in the world has to deal with data analysis now, at least every professional in the world. So, raise your game in terms of data analysis. I think you also have to talk about data presentation, data visualization, and
Absolutely.
become the kind of person who says, when you show a graph, people understand, and whether or not they agree with it, they understand your point.
Yep.
It requires courage. I mean, I have seen so many cases where data is just thrown up there, maybe not even analyzed, or maybe it is analyzed and it's graphed. It's just like, what does this mean?
What's the point?
Say what
Right?
it means.
What are you trying to say?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Another thing is you should always be willing to put your name on the report. If you aren't able to put your name on the report, that tells you something's not okay.
Yep.
I mean, you're not willing to stand behind this. The I don't think you can do too much in learning about risk assessment and risk management. I think quality has always been about that, but I think more so now. And there's good tools. I think the one thing that I guess kind of weighs on me as I think about this is how, as a quality world, I don't think that we have moved the ball enough. Like, if you start looking at a lot of what's in the bodies of knowledge and the standards, they're kind of lagging. They're not up with what the understanding is today. I don't know if you're familiar with Fred Schenkelberg of Ascendo Reliability, but he often talks about
Yes,
that
actually,
in terms of reliability.
Yeah.
Sure. And then that, the some of the things that are being taught and practiced today are stuck in the past. And, there's many practices that we have to be mindful of. It's, Six Sigma as an example is, when I was trained in Six Sigma, it was a 4-week training course. And, we had, there were things, if you're going to be a black belt, you have to have a $250,000 project. Green belts have to have a $50,000 project. And, I've coached so many teams, and I've had like multi-million-dollar projects that are like trivial walks in the park. And then on the other hand, I remember this one project where there's heroic effort on part of the test engineer. I mean, this was heroic. She went through for years. This was when I was designing. This was just after I started in the group in the continuous improvement coaching, but I had worked in the anti-lock brake valve testing, and all along we had been hammering on the test engineering because of variation in the results.
Mm-hmm.
There's too much variability in these results, and it's your fault. You fix your test stand. Well, this engineer, she got like, I don't know, 2 or 3 dozen parts, and she tested them on the 2 different test stands.
Mm-hmm.
Different days, different orders for weeks. And it turned out that 2 of those parts were always perfect. 2 of the parts didn't know that they were supposed to be variable. And we had all kinds of issues with variability, but 2 of those parts were always good. And you're like, how does the test stand know that this is the part that's supposed to test good every single time? Right?
Interesting.
I mean, it was heroic work. It was heroic work. But, the particular methodology that we were trying to certify her for, the consultant was like, well, she didn't figure out why. It's like, but she's the test engineer. She's not the product design engineer. And so, it's like, to me, that level of investigation, that thoroughness was like, this is what's got to get rewarded. And so sometimes these, some of the things that we practice in quality, the certifications are actually counterproductive.
Yes, they are.
I'm a little jaded because, I have coached, I don't know how many people to certifications. I mean, I never kept close track, but it's certainly in the hundreds. And I'm just like, I don't see a correlation between the amount of learning somebody gets and the level of certification. But I have dealt with enough consultants to know that, they're trying to, justify their
existence.
billing.
Yep.
Yeah. And it's just like, well, that doesn't say good things about them. It doesn't say good things about the people who hired them, in the sense of what are you really trying to get out of this? So again, if we step back and say, what is quality about? It's about knowing what's going on. And do you have the skills to help reveal that? So again, that does require knowing the tools. There's no ifs, ands, or buts. There's no escape from that. You need to know the tools, right? You need to understand. Statistics is not that hard, but it does take effort. And
There's some critical thinking, right?
yeah,
I would, an open mind.
You have to be critical. I think you have to be skeptical. I think we talked about this we did talk about this in the Quality Warrior talk, is that, you've got to be optimistic, right? You got to believe things are going to get better, but you also have to be skeptical, because you don't want to, how do you say, deceive yourself. Right. I mean, you have to say, hey, this looks great. What's wrong with it? What's wrong with the way I looked at this? Right. So there's always that level of skepticism you have to have. I mean, or even a little sense of paranoia, like something bad's going to happen, because, quality is basically worrying. Creating good quality means worrying a lot.
Yeah.
You just have to expect bad things to happen. And you're like, well, how could this go wrong? What could possibly happen? And, I'm expecting this supplier to do that, but why do I believe that? And can they really do it? Versus, oh yeah, it's their problem, and I'm just going to wash my hands and run away from it. We've seen plenty of that. But if the things that I would say, I guess to wind it up, is I would say, the first thing a quality professional needs to really understand is who is the customer of the quality professional. So when I was, in the tier 1 automotive supplier, I looked around and said, oh, the person who's, allocating money to my salary is the chief engineer or the chief engineers, right? They would have to agree that whatever I did was valuable to them, right? Because if what I'm doing isn't valuable to them, they don't want to pay for it. So, that's the first customer you need to understand, is who are you serving within your organization? And then what's important to that person for them to be successful? And then what are you doing to help them be successful? All right. Those are the questions you have to answer. Because if I was talking with a guy, and he didn't recognize that he was being passive, waiting for direction, as opposed to looking and saying, this is the person who's like, signing off on my salary, and I'm just waiting for that person to tell me what to do. And as a professional, you shouldn't have to wait to be told.
No way, Jose. You need to
sometimes it'll be tolerated if they don't have any other options, but as soon as they can find somebody, that will be proactive, they're going to go to that person, right? And then you'll be sitting there wondering, why did that guy get promoted versus me? But, helping that person be successful is your job. Now, you also have to understand who all the other customers are. Who's the customer of your, internal customer, and what do they need to be successful? And, how do you help them? Right. So that's the first thing any any professional, but specifically quality professionals really need to understand. And then I would say you have to know your job and your tools better than any of your customers. And I have, so I recall one case where we had a customer who was just beating up on this, one of these quality engineers I had trained in Six Sigma. And so that our quality engineer came and talked to me. He says, they're just beating me up on, because the p-value isn't acceptable to them. And, he showed me the data, and I took a look. I said, your process is stable. It's capable. And the p-value, I mean, it was like a really, really tiny issue.
Yeah.
It was barely outside. But if you just looked at the chart, you would say, this is fine. And so, but he kept beating up on him. And I said, well, just ask that supplier quality engineer what the null hypothesis is.
And they had no idea, right?
Oh, that shut him down, right? So to me, the lesson that I get out of that is, if you understand your tools, if you understand the statistics, and somebody who doesn't, who's in a position of, authority over you, whether it's a customer or somebody else, and then they start trying to beat your head in. I mean, if you know your tools, you can go back and say, this is what this means. And, it says it's good, and you can fight back. You have the tools. But I've also seen too many cases where the people didn't know their tools well enough and they were getting beaten up. And then, then I have to go in as a heavy and beat back,
Yep.
and I'm willing to do that, but I just think it's unnecessary, right? Because you've got to know your tools better than your customers. And maybe if you're new in the job and they're better than you, hey, take advantage and learn from them, right? But you can't sit there and say, oh, well, I'll just dump it on them. It's like, no, you need to
I'll
own
just
it.
have them figure it out for me.
Have it
Right?
figured out for me. I'll pass them the data. It's like, no, that's not okay, because representing your company or your organization, you need to be strong. If there's only one person who understands what's going on, it better be you, not your customer. Like the worst case is your customer is going to just be, just going to do horrible things to you, probably, unless they're really decent people. But they're under pressure too, and you need to be, you're being paid by somebody, and step up. So you've got to know your job better than anybody else. And every, I can't speak to, oh, you need to know this specifically or that specifically, but whatever job you're in, although in quality, you must know statistics. I'm sorry. That's just, it's learnable. And there's so much resource available, and understanding p-value. Yes, it makes your brain explode at first, but once you understand it, it's not that bad.
Yeah. It becomes pretty easy. Yeah.
Yeah. It's not that bad. And then, I think the other thing, and this is an attitudinal thing, is, recognize that quality has a really important role. It's a very important role. Again, if you believe as I do, the quality is to reveal the state, and maintain known the state of the organization. That is one of the most important roles you can possibly have. And it's not about filling out paperwork. The paperwork is in service of knowing the state, right? Documenting and so forth. But that's not the paperwork's not the purpose. The paperwork is the documentation that helps communicate it, right? And leaves a trail so that you can say, yeah, we were operating.
Yeah, we did this and that, right? And it was okay.
Everything's okay, but it's a case of, hey, what's our state, and do we need to do anything? Do we need to do more, do less? Do
things differently, right?
Yeah, and how is that consistent with customer expectations and with our business imperatives? So to me, again, that's an attitude thing where you have to say, hey, what is our role? And is it, are we truly serving that need? Or are we just a bunch of folks pushing paper around? And, if you're just a bunch of folks pushing paper around, I got some news for you. Quality 4.0 is going to end your job.
Yes.
Because the things, pushing paper, all that documentation, it can be automated. It is repetitive.
It will be automated.
Yeah. Oh yeah, of course. And it's just a question of time. Yeah. But on the other side, the intuitive, the perceptiveness, the able to extract patterns, and particularly social ones, right? Those are difficult those are a little more difficult to suss out with artificial intelligence. And artificial intelligence is loaded with biases anyways. So if you look at, say, for me as a human being, and what do I have that's powerful and difficult for a computer to leverage? Well, it's you as a social being, and you being able to understand like implications of things that you can get trending data and so forth, but that doesn't really tell you the things that you as a person could suss out as again, as a social person in your culture, and knowing other cultures and whatever unique experiences each of us bring.
Emotions, right?
Oh, exactly.
So analyze that.
Yeah. Well,
but you can, but it's not as straightforward as analyzing manufacturing data, right?
Sure. And it's not the creative thing, and it's not, again, you can have computers do stuff within bounds, but if you sit there and say, hey, as we are trying to satisfy a customer, right? The customer said they want this, but in reality, they want something else. I mean, that's not something your computer's ever going to be able to do, right? Because that's getting social cues. They said this, they meant that. Right. And as somebody, I learned to speak Spanish when I was working in Mexico, and some of those things, some things just don't translate, right? I mean, there's
Oh,
social norms that, well, for example, as an American, what does tomorrow mean? Means tomorrow, the next day.
oh, in
But
Spanish, that has a completely different meaning,
well,
right?
in Spanish, you would translate directly the word mañana as being tomorrow, right? For me as an American, I would say, oh, that's very definite in time. But my Spanish teacher would say, mañana does not mean tomorrow. It means not today.
Not today. At a
It
later
is not
point
yeah, my
in time.
my Spanish instructor was like quite clear that it's interpreted differently culturally. For me as an American, I tend to look at time in a certain way, and that means that, if you said tomorrow means the next day, and if I commit to deliver something tomorrow means, the next day. Whereas if I was working with one of my Mexican counterparts and they said mañana, I can't necessarily accept that means the next day. They may mean, well, I can't
Not
do it
now.
right now, but maybe this week. And it's not that it's better or worse. It's just it's different. And if you don't recognize those things, but those are a little bit harder to understand again. And we're
Decipher,
using
right?
an
Yeah.
extreme cultural contrast here, but there's all kinds of subtle messages that we can see and we can interpret, that again, if you start saying, hey, the my chief engineer has been talking about this, but been asking more questions about that. Maybe they need a different set of data than's getting provided. Maybe they're just tolerating it because they don't have anything better. And artificial intelligence won't recognize that need because that need may not be articulated at all, or if it is at all, it's not very clear. Whereas that's what you bring as a human. And so again, you got to be strong with the tools. You got to be, you have to have, you have to, know who your customers are, but then, understand we're bringing in, we bring some special things for us as human beings that, as a quality professional, if you want a long career of making things better, making your company better, making things more sustainable, making our world more just, all those things, well, leverage what's special about us as human beings. And part of that is, oh, I can see things that maybe there's not a sensor out there measuring, but there are expectations out there that are unstated, and there are things that they say but they don't mean. Those are some of the powers that we have as professionals, and we should leverage. I mean, people can't, I often say, if I'm working on whatever product I'm working on, I know way more about it than any of our end customers do, because it's my life. It's what I do all day long, every day. They don't do all day long, every day. Consequently, they don't know how to articulate what their needs really are.
Mm-hmm.
They don't know how we measure it. They don't know how we look at it. They don't know how we design it. They don't know what choices we're making. So we have to leverage our special talents as humans, to understand other humans, and then to like bring that in there. And then there comes a point when the artificial intelligence and all of the supercomputing stuff comes into play.
Yeah.
So yeah, but quality 4.0, I mean, I agree with you. I think there's a real tendency to look at the shiny computational
Technology, yeah.
stuff, and
Which is great. Yeah.
it's useful. I mean, again, it's not that it's bad,
It
but
just
it will
not the
change
it's
things.
just not the, not the whole picture. It's a part of it. It's an important part, right? But it's not the big picture.
Yeah, it's changing things. It's changing
It
how we
is.
will do our jobs. It's giving us a chance to do different and better things.
But
But
to your point, we can't move on. We can't move into this new phase until we have understood and applied the other things that you mentioned, right?
mhm,
The human side of things,
yes,
the got to know your tools and methods and all that. You got to be solid, right? So you can facilitate things,
yes,
right? You need to be able to visualize your data and tell a story through your data. And if you can do that, don't even think about the shiny technology, side of quality 4.0. because you'll not be successful. So
well,
that's
you'll just garbage. It'll become a garbage in, garbage out situation, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you're not gonna provide the value that justifies your employment, right? And that's, I mean, it's more than employment. I think all of us want to make a contribution, right? And so I would say, hey, if you really want to make the contribution, you've got to understand how you can serve the goals. And it's not just following instructions.
It's about being conscious.
Yeah.
Right. Being conscious of all these things and try to improve yourself through, this is really a self-study thing, right? No one's going to tell you as a quality professional or quality practitioner, hey, you need to have these things. It's kind of like you need to anticipate what your business needs, what today's environment needs from you, right? And how you can contribute to it. And to your point, it's for the betterment of not just your company or your department, but ultimately for the betterment of society.
Absolutely.
Ideally.
Well, I mean, that's the hope. I mean,
that's the hope.
I mean, these tools could be used for evil. There's no two ways around it. Yeah. But one would hope that you want to create a sustainable society, and there's and I think that's, at least for me, that's what I want to do, right?
Great.
I want to leave a world better than I found it, right? So
now,
and I think quality and all these concepts and paradigms that we have, is like an amplifier, right? We can do better. Understanding these concepts, you can be more powerful to make these improvements in sustainability and performance and everything, and that's the thing, is a lot of it's just a way of thinking. But if you understand that way of thinking, I mean, you're going to pop up another level and become so much better.
Absolutely.
And Pareto is the center of all of it, right? So.
Absolutely. So, well, this is great stuff. Honestly, I've learned so much, the past hour. This is already very, very helpful. So before we wrap up, just a couple more questions. I'm not sure that, if you're still a continuous improvement coach or what your plans are, but I think our listeners would love to hear what your plans are, because I think you could, teach this to a broader audience. You could probably, based on, your knowledge and expertise and mindset. I love all these things that you've mentioned. You could be a coach to many.
Well, I really appreciate that. Yeah, actually that's one of the interests that I have is, with the pandemic, I've focused on caring for my family, but at this point, I'm like, yeah, we're at a point where, I've taught a lot of this, and I expect to be putting it out there. I've done a couple of presentations for my section of the ASQ, one of which, you mentioned, the Way of the Quality Warrior, but another on my favorite quality tool, the SIPOC. So I expect to do a lot more of that, and I think I'm going to be following shortly in your path to create podcasts as well. So
nice.
Forward to that in the not too distant future.
So we'll be hearing from you. Great. Well, thank you, Keith. Thank you so much again for this talk with me. I enjoyed it a lot, and I'm pretty sure our audience did as well.
I guess I just want to say, if anybody wants to connect to me for whatever reason, but LinkedIn is a very fine choice. So, again, I'm happy to talk quality.
Absolutely.
I just
be channeling
love the ideas
and messages to you.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks a lot, Gabor. It's really been fun visiting with you.
Absolutely. Likewise.